you guys. So first, before we started this series last week talking about revival and like kind of bringing energy back to some of the parts of our lives that we lost, and which we'll jump into that a little bit more. But a quick note, some of you may have heard or known, I have a little devotional book that I want to give you guys to help like keep notes and do some like reflections at home and all that. But I picked up the books like last night and got here this morning and saw that the books were printed all wrong. So if you're expecting to get a little devotional book, if your parents said anything about that, or if you're waiting, or when I show up next week with like, look, I got a book. That's kind of like what happened. We'll have that next week for you, or get it to you somehow throughout this week. But I say that because we really want you to dive in and really get into this theme of what revival is. The whole church like Pastor Doug kind of changed the sermon. Joel and the high school ministry, they are kind of talking about this in different ways, and like Jeff is really pushing us to talk about what it means to have a revival in our lives. And especially because it's been almost a year of just like this weird craziness of whatever we have experienced throughout this past year. And we know that there are parts of ourselves that have just kind of felt like dead. A loss of energy, no motivation, like, you know, going to school on Zoom again, you're just like, oh, Zoom, really? This thing again? No desire probably to get off the couch to like be energized. We experience here like with church, like I get comments like, I don't really feel like getting up in the morning to come to church. I'd rather stay home instead of go to Epic. And just we lose this energy. We have lost this energy in so many different areas of our lives. And so we really want to dive into this revival theme and talk about these different aspects of what it means to have a revival in our lives and to bring energy back to some of the things that probably this past year has taken from us. And we looked at it last week as kind of this introduction of what revival is, and we said that revival starts with wanting to bring life back to that which has been lost. And we see in our lives in so many different parts, and we talked about this last week, like we need to identify those parts of ourselves, those parts of our lives that have lost their energy, that have lost their life, and revive them. And we talked about all the different things that revival can mean, of like bringing back to life, like in CPR, revival, like just kind of making it new again. Like whatever that means for you, we recognize that all of us across the board, in some way or another, throughout this past year, we are struggling with parts of ourselves that have lost energy, have lost motivation, have lost connection with that which was important to us before. We kind of like just developed habits that have overcome the good habits that we used to have. We've just become lazy. Whatever it means, we have all kind of dealt with that. And so what we want to do for the next few weeks is really just focus on what does it mean to revive them? What do we need to do for that? And kind of talk about what that means. And so the first part of the series for this week and next week, we're going to talk about like what does it mean to refresh. And I'm thinking kind of like the image that came to my mind a lot, especially because we've been on the computer, of like refreshing a web page, right? How many of you have ever had to refresh a web page? Y'all know what I'm talking about? And often that comes because like it's going too slow. I don't know why, like when it's going slow, I'm like, refresh, it'll help it. Or if it like doesn't load right and like you hit refresh and like you kind of like start that page over. And kind of the same thing for us as we talk about like revival, it starts with kind of refreshing our mindset a little bit, kind of like restarting in a sense, or kind of just like hitting that button to like let it load again in our lives. Especially probably because as we have experienced throughout these past few months, we all have our different things. For me, one of my ways to cope with staying at home a lot and trying to deal with Asher is probably a lot of online shopping. Anybody online shopping? Probably maybe not as much. If you like had to constantly ask your parents for money, they're like, no. For me, like especially when I was sharing with someone, I was buying all kinds of things. Like it's only for a couple weeks. I'll get this for when we get to have friends over again. Or I'll buy this again. Or Asher needs this new toy. I need this thing. Like all kinds. And I often don't do a lot of online shopping. I was going to make a joke about someone in our family who does do a lot of online shopping, but I don't want to throw Asher under the bus like that. And so, that's not usually my thing. I do love going to Target, and so I went to Target a lot. Anybody go to Target a lot throughout the whole thing? I'm like, oh man, I need this new plant. I don't even care about plants. And that's just an example. Like, I even staying at home, like, I played more video games than I have in the past couple of years. Anybody played more video games than usual now because you've been home a lot? Watched a lot more movies. Anybody watch a lot of TV throughout this festival? Do a lot more puzzles. Anybody do, like, all of a sudden you just pick up puzzles? No? Some of you? We could probably go down the list and talk about all the different things that we started bringing into our lives to help cope with being at home all the time, to break up the routine of being on the computer all the time for school. There are probably all kinds of things, but what I have noticed is that we lose parts of ourselves when we forget to fill our lives with what we actually need. Like, do I actually need to do a lot of online shopping? Some might argue yes, but actually no. But if I focus on the online shopping all the time and just like, oh yeah, I need to online shop, I need to online shop, I need to go to Target, I need to go to Target, I need to play video games, I need to do this, I need to do more puzzles. Like, if I fill my lives with the things that I don't actually need, then the parts of myself that actually energize who I am and what I do, that part of me begins to die. It's kind of like this plant that we have at our home. Jen and I will always joke, like, we cannot take care of plants. I think I've shared stories before. We have 2 plants. We started off when we got married with 5. We were like, let's buy all the plants for our house, and we're like, bought a lemon tree, bought all kinds of flowers to be on our patio, and bought these 2 plants to be inside, and now it's only those 2 plants that are inside, and they are pretty much, they're dead, but we don't want to let go. We don't want the plants to beat us. And because I don't know how to take care of plants, I often give them the wrong things. I will give it water because, like, I think it needs water, and I will dump a whole bucket of water, but then I forget to give it sun. And so it still dies because it's not getting the sun. Or I'll give it a lot of sun without giving it water, and then it will die because it's not getting water. And so, like, when we focus on the wrong parts of our lives and filling it up with too much of the wrong thing that we don't actually need, it still can cause us to, like, lose those parts of ourselves that energize us, that actually gives us life. And so what I want you to recognize is, like, as we refresh that, like, think about the things that you have filled your life with that maybe you don't actually need, that have actually slowly been taking the life out and the energy out of the things that you do. And as I've talked about, like, what we need to recognize in that is that there is a difference between doing what we like to do and doing what we need to do. Like, for example, I like playing video games, and it's not necessarily wrong that we play video games. I like watching movies, and it's not necessarily wrong that we watch movies. But when I focus more, I'm saying, like, the thing that I need to do to give myself life is just watch more and more movies. There's a difference between that. Or even when you think about, like, food. Like, yeah, I love going to In-N-Out. But if all I ever do is just eat In-N-Out all the time, and I don't actually eat, like, balance that out with, like, the healthy things and the things that my body actually needs to be healthy, then I'm making myself sick. And so we need to recognize, and especially as we go into this conversation, that there is a difference between doing what we like to do and doing what we need to do. And we need to make sure that we fill our lives with those things that we actually need. The Bible talks about this in Proverbs chapter 10. Now, Proverbs is written by King Solomon, who was King David's son. And Proverbs is like kind of like this book of wisdom, where he's just kind of writing all these, like, catchy things, and like he's just saying, okay, if you really want to live a good life, this is what you need to do, and this is kind of like what God's telling me about good life. And so he writes down all these, like, thoughts. And in Proverbs chapter 10 is basically he's talking about what the difference is. He gives this comparison back and forth, and, like, a couple examples, starting in verse 1. He says, a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son heartache to his mother. Which, oof, man. Like, if you're a wise child, bring delight to your father. A foolish son, you bring heartache to his mother. Ill-gotten gains do not profit anyone, but the righteousness rescues from death. The Lord will not let the righteous go hungry, but he denies the wicked what they crave. And so you see this back and forth, and it goes on like that throughout the whole chapter, where he says, like, if you live this way, good things will happen, but if you live this way, bad things will happen. But then, especially in verse 24, he writes, what the wicked dreads will come to him, but what the righteous desires will be given to him. And so we see this difference, that when you have a heart focused on righteousness and pursuing what God wants for you, when your heart and your mind and your habits and your life is focused on pursuing God, the righteous desires will be given to you. And so there's a difference between focusing and pursuing what you need and what you like. And that is the difference. It's not basically like we think of wicked like evil and like the bad guys and the bad things that happen in this world. But it's really that difference between like pursuing righteousness and not pursuing righteousness. And when you pursue the things that are not righteous, when you fill your life with the things that are not of God, then things that we don't necessarily fill us up or give us life happen to us. But when we pursue righteousness and when we pursue God, when we pursue God's heart, then the desires and the things that we need come into our lives. And so we need to recognize that we need to fill our lives, what we need to fill our lives with are those things, people, and activities that lead us to experience God's joy. That's what we need to fill our lives with. We have filled our lives throughout this year with so many different things that are probably not of God. And again, I get it, like movies, not necessarily bad. But when you are spending more time watching movies and completely ignoring God, then you are not experiencing God's joy. If you're spending all of your time playing video games and not giving any time to God, then you're not experiencing God's joy. If you're spending all your time arguing with people on the internet about things that are happening or like putting them down and not pursuing what God wants for you, you are not experiencing God's joy. We need to fill our lives with the things, people, and activities that lead us to joy. And we'll talk about this a little bit more about like taking things out of our lives. But I want you to think about like, what is it that you fill your life with? What are you filling your life with? Who are the influences in your life? What are the activities that you're doing? What is impacting you the most? Because chances are we have probably taken the lazy things that we just like doing and really just investing all of our time in that, when we really need to be focusing our time and refreshing ourselves with what we need. And so I want you to see that revival starts with refreshing our lives with what we need in order to experience more of the joy that God wants for us. I'm not saying like cut everything out, but fill more of your time with what God wants for you. Maybe spend more time reading the Bible. Maybe spend more time praying. Maybe spend more time listening to worship music than the other music. Maybe spend more time talking about God with people rather than talking about the video games that you're talking. You have the ability and the time to shave your focus off of the things that you don't need and give that attention to God and see what happens. If you've been playing video games for 2 hours, maybe play video games for an hour and a half and give 30 minutes to God and start there. If you've already watched 5 movies today, maybe don't watch that 6th one and spend your time praying or reading the Bible or whatever and see what happens. Start filling your lives and refreshing your habits and your focus with what you need in order to experience more of what God wants for you. Start there. And we'll talk more a little bit about like taking things out, but let's start by focusing on putting things in that bring us closer to God and experience more of what He has and see how that changes your life. What we're going to do, we have about